Hi everyone, I'm here in New York at the New York Climate Week and alongside the UN General Assembly. And I'm joined here by Martien van Nieuwkoop, the Global Director for Food and Agriculture at the World Bank, the largest financier of climate change in the world. So Martien, what are you hearing in New York this week that's relevant to food and agriculture?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm very pleased to be here actually at the UNGA and at Climate Week because it's been a while. I mean, that we actually had face-to-face meetings, so it's actually a nice change after having done those meetings on Zoom for the last 2 years or so. Um, you know, of course, food security is very high on the agenda, and many events at UNGA and Climate Week actually touching upon it. What I found very interesting was the Global Food Security Summit. I mean, that AU, EU, US, and Spain organized earlier this week. We had many heads of state actually talking about food security and expressing their concerns. I mean, very clearly, food security very high on the agenda of many governments. What I find interesting is when it comes to putting measures in place, to address rising food and nutrition insecurity, a clear expression and how to say, a clear expression and commitment, of many heads of states and countries to make sure that the short-term measures to address rising food insecurity and nutrition insecurity are very much aligned with kind of building resilience in agriculture and food systems. So to making sure that those activities and measures reinforce, the longer term measures. So that's one. Another interesting one is that particularly, if you listen to heads of state, I think the relationship between food security and national security, comes out, very clearly. So, there is no hunger without peace, and there is no peace without hunger. Of course, if you take that a step further, recognizing that climate is a big driver of rising food insecurity, and giving that statement, one could then also argue that actually climate change is undermining peace, and that then for climate change and measures to control climate change and build resilience and mitigation, that is also a matter of national security. I think that's another kind of takeaway that I found very interesting.
Yeah, but in all of these piece of food security, how do you combine the short and long term? You mentioned the need to do that for food security, but can you also do it for peace?
Um, it's a great question because I think we're trying to get our arms around on actually how you do it. Because what you see is that it looks like that climate change is unfolding at a much faster pace. That the world is building resilience, and of course that is then causing, external shocks and emergencies at greater frequencies, and we kind of seeing crisis after crisis coming at us and actually pushing us in the direction of those short-term measures. So basically, we really need to rethink on how we actually put those short-term measures in place and how we build resilience. It boils down what I've been saying also. We need to get used to, building resilience in firefighting mode. Now, how you do that? I think many people are kind of trying to come to terms with that. I don't think there's a clear answer to that, and I don't think we have clear success stories here, that we can point up. But I think that's the direction, we need to go, clearly.
So this year, the COP27 is taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh, the city of peace. It's also an implementation COP with the theme Together for Implementation. So what would you like to see in the lead up to COP27?
Well, I think the message, should come out very clearly that, the agriculture and food transition is critical, for the Paris Agreement, to achieve objectives of staying, in a 1.5 or 2 degree world. An energy and a transport transition is not enough. Without the agriculture and food system transition, it would not happen. I think it would be good if that is actually being recognized explicitly, more explicitly than up until now. One. Second, I mean, the agriculture and food system transition is lagging the energy and transport transition. So measures to accelerate, I mean, the agriculture and food system transition would actually be very critical. So I would be looking forward also to the COP. I mean, seeing concrete steps towards accelerating, I mean, that transition. For where I'm sitting, I think that would require action on three fronts. I think first is, making sure that the incentives are aligned for farmers and the private sector. I mean, to invest in resilient production systems and lowering the carbon footprint. I mean, right now, those incentives are not aligned. And of course, there's huge public support that governments are providing to agriculture and food to the tune of about $650 billion per year. That actually provides, the wrong incentives, and that is very much evidenced by the hidden cost of the global food system. I mean, that were pointed out very clearly last year at the UN Food System Summit. I mean, so we think that repurposing the existing public support to agriculture and food can actually be a major driver, to get the incentives right and actually back that up with significant financing. So that's one. The other is we really need to accelerate innovation. So there what we see is that countries are underinvesting significantly in agriculture and food, particularly in Africa and Middle East and North Africa. This despite the fact that the returns, to investing in agri research and innovation are very, very attractive. We have very high hopes and recognize the potential of digital and data-driven agriculture. I think that can resolve many constraints that farmers face and actually move agriculture and food in the right direction. So scaling up investments in agri research and innovation, new delivery methods. We are kind of working with providing incentives to the private sector and price competition. Publicly financed agri research doesn't necessarily have to be publicly executed. It can be publicly financed and executed by the private sector. So different delivery mechanisms there. And the third building block for accelerating food systems transition, of course, is scaling up investments in resilience and reducing carbon footprint. We need to invest heavily in low carbon rice, low carbon livestock. We need to better integrate, supply chains to reduce food loss and waste. We need to have a hard look at synthetic fertilizers and, improving their use efficiency as well as alternatives. So those are some of the mega investments, that need to be made. And the question then is, how can we bring in private sector financing into those? Because the scale of those investments probably will go beyond, what governments and international financial institutions like the World Bank can actually provide. Because those envelopes are pretty large. So what can we do? Can we think of compacts between the public sector and the private sector where the public sector de-risks some of those investments, and of course to the extent that those investments reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's a very good public goods rationale for providing those de-risking arrangements. And then in return, the private sector that actually steps in and actually benefits from those de-risking arrangements should then raise ESG standards, because we know in the agriculture and food sector is actually lagging very much behind when it comes to putting in place ESG standards compared to other sectors. And that's actually quite significant. If you look at some of those sustainability indexes, that are being published, where they list companies across various sectors on how serious they are with ESG standards. In those top hundreds, you would expect about 10 to 12 food companies, because agriculture and food is about 10 to 12% of global GDP. Typically you only see one or so companies. So that shows that the sector actually is very lagging and I need to step up. So those are the three
Yeah.
building block, I mean, that I see to accelerate food system transition at the COP. You know, I mean, aligning incentives, accelerating innovation, and scaling investments.
Thank you so much, Martien.